Hi there, my name is Uzo and I am a specialist musculoskeletal physiotherapist and also an accredited strength and conditioning coach in the UK. This video is brought to you in association with Rehab Guru. This video is all about programming and periodisation for your rehabilitation patients. So, periodisation and programming. Essentially, programming is like the holy grail, in contemporary rehabilitation and also training science. So if you think about it, from a very logical perspective, so programming is important because essentially our patient's ability, to tolerate higher training loads is all contingent upon, us programming them, effectively so that they can reach their goals. So when we talk about training load, essentially what we're really talking about is trying to manipulate, the acute program variables so that we achieve, a desired effect at the end of the patient's rehabilitation and they can get back to doing the things that they desperately want to do, which is why they come to see you in the first place. So when we talk about training load, essentially we're talking about intensity, so the load, the amount of load that's being moved or manipulated. We talk about duration, so we talk about the reps and sets, and then we talk about the frequency. So how many times per week, how many times per month, how many repetitions, so how many sessions, over the period of the duration of that patient's rehabilitation. And this is really important. This is where programming essentially comes into its own. So there's some key concepts that I want you to understand, in regards to the training load. So firstly, we have what we call a stimulating load. A stimulating load is essentially what we want, the patient, to participate in. We want them to participate in a training load, or a rehabilitation load that is higher than what they're normally used to. If we can get this there, and we can get them training in a ways which is higher than they would ordinarily be used to, and this is where we're likely to see some physiological adaptations, or we're likely to create a stimulus for that physiological adaptation. The next concept is called a retaining load. So a retaining load is essentially it's a typical load. So it's a standard load that essentially allows recovery at the end, of the patient's block of programming. And we'll touch on what I mean by blocks in a moment. But essentially, this is a load that allows recovery, but also allows fitness to be maintained. So it's not a load which is pushing them, to a higher level, but it certainly retains the place where they are now. Then the final concept is called a detraining load. So this detraining load is where we don't want our patients to be. This is a load, a training load, which is substantially lower than what they are normally used to. So we don't want them to be in that position, because essentially what they're going to do is they're going to detrain themselves. So when we're talking about the manipulation of training loads, essentially if we manipulate a training load, and when I talk about training load, this is a rehabilitation load, it's just another phrase for rehabilitation, but we give a patient, something to do, because we want there to be some type of physiological adaptation. If we get this physiological adaptation and we create this stimulus, and this hopefully, leads to an increase in performance, or it should do, all things being the same and all things being well. So there's three types essentially, of load, that I see. So the first one is what I would call the standard haphazard rehab training load. Unfortunately, this happens quite often, and I used to do this myself, until I became wiser. So this is essentially the patient rocks along on a bit of a linear load, a bit like this, really. Every now and again, there's a few bumps along the way, There's a few bumps along the way and there's an increase in training load, but really it's relatively linear. We don't really change it very much. We send our patient away for 3 weeks and unfortunately come back 3 weeks later and they're still essentially doing the same thing. That's bad, because actually there is no adaptation, or very little adaptation is going to take place. They're on a retaining load. We don't want them to be. We don't want them to be there. The other type of loading scheme that I see essentially is a linear load. So essentially, this is good in a way, but it becomes bad. The longer you're on it for, and it's a load, and it's a weekly load, or monthly load that keeps on going up and up and up. Okay, so it keeps on going up and up and up and up. Okay, and we get to the point where actually the patient can't tolerate anymore. Okay, and they give up because actually the loads just keep coming up. The loads just keep going up and up and up and up, and there is no recovery. Now, the load that we really want to subject our patient to is what we call step loading. Okay, so step loading is very, very common in sort of linear periodization models, which is essentially where we want to be. Okay, and the model that we use essentially to think about, okay, periodization, okay, is a model, okay, from Hans Selye, okay, from 1936. Essentially, Hans Selye, he came up with this model called the general adaptation syndrome. Okay, and essentially the best way to think about this is to think about our patient. Okay, essentially all patients essentially start, okay, with their initial homeostatic state. Okay, they all start at a baseline. So this is their retaining load. Okay, retaining training load. Okay, we subject them to a week of training. So, for example, and what this does is this causes essentially the organism, which is them, okay, to go into what we call, or what Hans Selye called, the alarm phase. Okay, if you think about it from a slightly different perspective, if you go to the gym and you haven't been to the gym for a long time and you subject yourself, okay, to doing weighted deadlifts or bicep curls, and it's a load that you're not used to, pretty much, okay, you're going to be a little bit sore, okay, and your body's going to feel like it's been challenged quite a lot, okay. This is called the alarm phase. But if you put this into a week, okay, and we have our patient training, say 4 times a week, okay, following their rehab program, and the stimulating load is slightly higher than what they're used to. Well, you can imagine this is going to take them into a bit of an alarm phase. Okay, so what we're going to see is we're going to see some accumulated fatigue, okay, and then essentially we're going to see a reduction in their physiological ability, okay, to do work. So if we go back to this idea of working over weeks, then what we essentially can see is that over a 0 to 4 week period, if we're following a step loading type protocol, then what we'll see is that actually as we keep loading these patients, okay, with load. So we start at week 1 at this load, week 2 we start at this load, week 3 we start at this load. As we keep loading, okay, as we put in some recovery at week 4, say down here, what we see is essentially we see the next phase where actually we start to get some compensation. So the body's physiology, okay, and its homeostatic state starts to change. And when we see this change, in essence, what's happening is basically we're taking the patient essentially to a new level of homeostatic performance. Okay, so essentially they're getting fitter, they're getting better, they're getting stronger, they're becoming more powerful, their tissues are becoming more resistant, the tissues are becoming more resilient. Okay, and essentially that's what we're looking for. And we can use essentially a step loading type process where actually week 1, okay, we have a set number of repetitions or sets. Week 2, we have a little bit more load. Week 3, we might have a little bit more load. Week 4, we might have a bit more load. Now, we can choose a 3-week type training block, okay, or we can pick a 4-week type training block. It doesn't really matter, okay, whether it's 3 or 4 weeks. Generally, okay, for the more frailer patient or for the more elderly patient, I will pick a 3-week training block. So I will go week 1, increase load, week 2, increase load, week 3 is a recovery week. For someone that's maybe younger, fitter, or more robust, okay, I might go for a 4-week. So week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4 is our detraining block. Generally speaking, okay, you can change, essentially you can manipulate the sets, okay, so week 1, okay, you might have them doing 3 sets. Week 2, you might have them doing 4 sets. Week 3, you might have them doing 5 sets. Week 4, you might come back down to 2 sets or 3 sets. Okay, the repetitions stay the same, but essentially, okay, the number of sets change. It might be that you choose to change the resistance, okay? So the sets stay relatively the same, but actually the resistance increases. It's probably better and easier, okay, simply to manipulate the set than it is to manipulate the resistance. Doesn't mean you can't. So I do hope you found this helpful, okay? And I hope actually this has been beneficial, okay, for you. Please feel free to share, okay, this video if you found it helpful, and don't forget you can also subscribe, okay, to all of our social media mediums, and also to our website if you'd like to find out more information about strength and conditioning and how you can apply it clinically in your own practice. Of course, you can do one of our face-to-face courses, or you can sign up and actually try one of our online courses, okay, either in agility training for therapists or the fundamentals of clinical strength and conditioning, the basics. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.